It's an honor to be interviewing Pedro Guerrero, and if I may, I'll refer to you as Pete.
You may.
Thank you. Let me begin by asking about your departure from your boyhood home of Mesa, Arizona. You departed to attend art school in Los Angeles, and would you tell us how this came about
that I took off and left Arizona behind?
To go to art school.
Yeah, to go to art school. Well, the atmosphere in Arizona is bad now to, these short brown people. It was just beginning then. And I wanted to be accepted, not because my name was, I changed it from P.E. to P. Edward to P. everything. I denied the fact that my name was Pedro. So I had to go someplace where they would accept it. So I have no idea what made me think that I should go to art school. I had a brother that had a lot of talent, but that didn't qualify me. I'm sorry to have to say some of this stuff, but I had to find a place to go and improve myself, because I didn't know where that was going to be. I had gone to see my brother, who was at that time at Arts Center in Los Angeles, and I asked when I got to the school, I wanted to know where I would find him, and they pointed out a doorway that I could go through. And so I went through there, and lo and behold, there was a naked woman standing out, and a whole lot of people drawing her. And I found out two things that day. You don't call them naked women; they're nudes. So that was part of my education. And but I wasn't ready for art school yet. I had to go back to Mesa and finish high school. But on my 20th birthday, I decided that. Well, let me tell you that I didn't have a girlfriend, but I had a car. And I had a friend who had a girlfriend that didn't have a car. So the three of us made a trio on a Friday. And one day, the boyfriend said, "Don't come pick me up because Marion and I broken up." So I thought, well, there's my Friday night festivities. And 10 minutes later, I got a call from Marion. And she said, "Are you going to pick me up?" And I said, "I can't because John isn't coming." She said, "There's no reason why you and I can't go out." And that's how aggressive I was in finding a girlfriend. But anyway, after it did work out because she was an Anglo, a Mormon in a Mormon town, and I was rejected. I could hold a job maybe as a bilingual clerk in some store, a stock boy, carry-out boy, but that was a limit. So I decided to go away, and I decided to go to California and see if I could see that dude again. It was an education. But when I got there, I asked the registrar to set me up with some art courses, and I had no portfolio, but they didn't have any art courses open. So I said, "What else do you have?" They said, "Well, we teach photography." And I said, "Well, I'll take photography." I'd never thought of it before. I didn't even have a camera. Oh, well, that's not true. I had a little box camera, it looked like it. But that wasn't really photography. So I took photography. I developed my first film, made my first print, and I fell madly in love. I never wanted to do another thing but take photographs again. That worked against me at the school because I didn't like their assignments. They were too commercial. I just wanted to shoot whatever moved me. And they were kind of ridiculous things. A little girl playing on the beach, a dead pelican with a beer can in its belly, a rock that had just been washed off by the sea and left a nice little design on the rock, the wave did. That was a portfolio I was building. The school was, well, they weren't furious, but they wanted me to come back. I'd put in 2 years in the school, and I was already a photographer, and so they wanted me to come back for the 3rd year. But the 3rd year came along, and I got too late starting, so I didn't know what to do. My dad could have hired me, but he didn't want to. So he said, you know what you should do? Why don't you go see that guy up there on the mountain? He's an architect. I think his name is Wright. Why don't you arrange to see him? Maybe he needs a photographer. So on a day that I do not remember, the date in 1940 or late 39, I showed up in what really was a desert. And this, as I described him to my family that night, this crazy old guy who's 72 years old is building a place out in the desert you wouldn't believe. But that's what I said when I came back. When I went to see Mr. Wright, I had never seen him before. I knew that he had a pork pie hat. That I knew because I seen a photo of him. And when he saw me, he looked at me and said, "And who are you?" And I said, my name is Pedro Guerrero, and I'm a photographer. I never said that before to anybody. I never made a nickel with photography. And he said, well, come on in, let me see what you can do. I showed him my portfolio, and he smirked, he smiled, he sneered, he laughed, and he said, what are you doing now? I said, I'm looking for a job. Well, would you like to work for me, for us? And I said, yes. I had no idea what that meant. So 15 minutes after I'd met him, with the world's worst, I should have a show of my portfolio sometime, world's worst portfolio. I got a job from the most fantastic inspiration in my entire life, next to my wife, that is. But with that 15-minute interview, I started a career which has lasted even today. Here I am. So Frank Lloyd Wright took a big chance with me, and I photographed him until the year he died. And so that took 20 years. We're 50 years apart in age.
You introduced yourself to Wright for the first time ever, saying that you were a photographer.
Yeah.
Is there a time that you remember when you ever introduced yourself as an artist, and could you talk about that, or is that not the case?
No, because by that time I knew I wasn't an artist, so I never introduced myself as that.
So you didn't think of photography as an art at that time?
No, it took some time for me to decide that it really was, but I'm very slow at reacting to things. I just recently became aware of the fact that some of these photos were taken and that I took them. I could go on telling you about how long it took me to become aware of what I had done. For example, that picture of Edward Durrell Stone in there, I'm astounded that I took that picture, particularly since he obviously knew I was coming. He set the stage for himself. And all I could do is stand wherever he had designated. So I photographed this man in this ridiculous setup. But I love it. I love the photo.
Yes, yeah, it's beautiful. Would you take a moment and reflect on your relationship with Wright and Calder and Nevelson, these three giants, and tell us what you admired most about them? I know they were. You've said, I've heard you say before that it was wonderful that when you met Wright, you didn't know what a great man Wright was, what a great architect Wright was, and that allowed you to develop a personal relationship with him that you probably wouldn't have if you had gone in there awestruck. But as you look back on your relationships with those three people, those three artists, architect and artist, what qualities struck you most about them?
Well, you know, they were very much the same in their work habits. I think that they never spent a moment without thinking of what they were going to do next or putting something together to create a work of art. They were so different in a way. I describe Wright as a aristocratic Hollywood idea of a perfect architect. And then I think that Alexander Calder, whom I thought more of a blacksmith than anything else, was not, Wright was reserved. Did I say Wright? I didn't say Mr. Wright.
First time in your life, Dad.
That Mr. Wright was very formal. I would never think of calling him Frank. When Mr. Wright died, I thought that was my anchor. In fact, in the period in which I worked with him, I made all kinds of connections with House and Garden and House Beautiful and architectural magazines. And that opened the door to people in the art field. So that, but I wasn't aware of it. I became aware of the fact that Frank Lloyd Wright was the most fantastic person I was ever going to meet. And when he died, as I say, I considered myself rudderless, but it did free me to do something that I had avoided before. I had been offered, through the work that I had done for the architectural magazine, other architects came to me and asked me if I wanted to photograph them exclusively. And until Mr. Wright died, I was afraid that one day I would have an assignment from, Alexander Calder, or not Alexander Calder, Edward Durrell Stone, or God, the names disappeared.
Yeah.
And I didn't want Mr. Wright to call me and say, I want you to come to Wisconsin right this minute. And I said, I can't because I'm doing a job for so-and-so. So I avoided doing anybody's work, even though I was living in the most architecturally conscious town in America, which is New Canaan, Connecticut. I got there by mistake, but it turned out, again, if I'd thought about it, I probably wouldn't have moved there. But I moved there anyway, and it turned out to be the best thing I ever did. When the first time I met Calder was through an assignment for House and Garden. They wanted me to photograph a story called A Man's Influence in the Kitchen. And I didn't know too much about Alexander Calder, but I knew he wasn't going to go through his recipes for us. So when we got there, the editor and I, he looked up from having his breakfast. he reached out with his hand and said, call me Sandy. Now, that opened up absolutely new worlds for me. And I looked around to see what it was that House and Garden wanted me to do. And there wasn't a thing in that Calder house that I knew House and Garden was going to want. Most of those magazines run stories and then try to sell the advertisers there's going to be a stove in this person's kitchen or this kind of furniture someplace. And that's the way they put together an issue. I looked around at the Calder kitchen, even though it excited me terribly because it was so different from the stage stuff that I was doing for House and Garden and for Frank Lloyd Wright. Everything had to be in its right place. And Sandy was absolute chaos. And it appealed to me. And so, but I knew House and Garden wasn't going to do it, so I took my camera, an 8x10 view camera, and I stole a few photographs around. And when I took them to House and Garden, they said, no, this will not do. So I said, release them to me. You don't have to pay me for the day. So they did. And I called the Calders the next day, and I said, if you let me, I want to come back because I want to do a whole story on the Calder situation. And then we became close friends. I visited him in France, in Connecticut, New York, or wherever he happened to be. And that was a relationship of almost 15 years after Wright. And then when he died, I had happened to run into, I had Wright and Calder, and I wanted a book, to publish a book. So I went to Doubleday because Jackie Kennedy was an editor there, and I thought if I had any luck, Jackie would be the editor. But they told me instead that they had to have 3 authors, that they accepted Wright and Calder, but I had to have somebody else. So I said, well, who do you suggest? And fortunately for the band that they mentioned, I keep forgetting his name. What's his name?
Andrew Wyatt.
Andrew Wyatt. They wanted to do Andrew Wyatt. So I did, how am I going to meet Andrew Wyatt? I knew how I was going to be, how I met Calder, how I met other people. So I went to see a friend of mine who happened to be the editor of Art in America, G. Lippman. And we said, I said, I have to meet Andrew Wyatt. And she said, and I'm sorry if I'm stepping on anybody's toes here, Andrew Wyatt? Why would you want to meet him? His house is a bore, he's a bore, and his artwork is a bore. So I said, well, what am I going to do? She said, what you ought to do is photograph Louise Devilson. I said, okay, how do I meet Louise Devilson? We'll have you both over for dinner. That's the way things kept going, you know. It was not ambition on my part, it was just destiny.
Wright and Calder both preceded Louise Nevelson in death. When it's written that when Louise Nevelson died, that you put your camera down.
Yes.
That was a sign that,
it was a signal. It was a signal to me. The people that I admire most and photograph most, you know, in a documentary die on me, so I'm going to quit. I can see what's happening now. They say, So I gave up photographing.
And I thought it might tell us something about how much personal investment you put in the subjects of your photography. But it's
Well, again, going back, it was after Louise died and I decided to give up photographing artists that I realized that it wasn't really me. I mean, they were getting old too. But I gave it up. It was a signal. Do something else. I come to think of, what did I do after that? I forgot.
well. Let me ask you. Just a follow-up to that in a way. And this is, I'm going to read part of this question, but critics, commentators have said that if you want to understand Wright, if you want the best biography of Wright, you should look at Guerrero's photographs of Wright. And the same has been said of Calder, that the best biography of Calder are Guerrero's photographs. What can you tell us about your unique ability to capture America's greatest architect and one of America's greatest artists?
Well, I can't tell you what the quality is, but I became a good friend. I became like a piece of furniture. They accepted me. They knew from the very start that I was never going to photograph him in a way that they wouldn't be proud to see the results. And I came around to understanding that much after the fact. I'm very slow. It's going to be about 6 months before I realize what I'm doing here. Well, I'll be 95 something by that time. Anyway, Jean Lippman said it in one of her magazines, that somehow or other I became so intimate and such an easy person to have around that they never thought about me as a photographer. But I was not the kind of photographer that walked around with a camera around his neck, snapping all the time. I had my camera somewhere nearby, and if I saw an opportunity, I went and got it. But I sneaked out, I sneaked in, I set up, I took photographs, and later I processed them and put them in my file. It is only now, this last year, that Dixie and I have gone through our files, and they're vast. And there are some of those things that somebody would come up to me and say, "You didn't take that picture, I took that picture. How come you have the negative?" I'd probably turn around and give them the negative. Because I don't think you have one here, but in one of the shows I had recently, there were 3 photographs of a service station in Macon, Georgia. They sent me from New York City to Macon, Georgia to photograph the service station. And I went. And it wasn't until a couple of months ago that I saw those prints for the second time, but for the first time as something that I had done that I'd forgotten all about it. It's a spectacular photograph, and I'm so glad I did it. I lost track of time. Sometimes I would write the date on the negative, and that's how come we can trace it. That service station, by the way, had been inspired by the lolly columns in the Johnson Wax building by Frank Lloyd Wright, but they were more angular than they were like wings. And somehow or other, while I was photographing it, one of those old Fords with the wings came by and parked gas up, and I photographed it, thought nothing about it. It wasn't until very recently that I realized that I was doing a theme sort of photograph. Where am I?
We're ready to close, and I just want to say how delightful it is to have Pedro Guerrero here, and to listen to these wonderful stories, and we're so grateful to you, and thank you so very much, and we look forward to the rest of the evening, the rest of this opening. Please, let's give Mr. Guerrero a round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you. Don't wait to see me jump off of here. I'm going to do it all by myself.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Possible to ask a question?
Sure, why not?
Could you talk about those wonderful metallic hangings which I've seen at the Paoli House Gallery?
Oh, you mean the
Mobiles.
mobiles?
Yes.
Well, I don't know how it got started. I think it started in Connecticut. I found a lot of sickles and rakes and forks, hay forks in the yard, piled them up, and I didn't know what I was going to do with them, so I started putting them together. And then when I left Connecticut, I think my daughter Barbara took them with her to Vermont, and I didn't see them for 20 years. She brought them to Arizona. Suddenly I realized that this is something I could be doing. And since then, I've made, 70 or so, 3 of which are at the Paoli Gallery, which are my finest work, I think. So, but I don't want this to be a signal for any of you to bring me anything rusty anymore. I haven't been feeling very well, and I think it's because I'm old, but I have this great fear that I'm allergic to rusty metal. and I may be, who knows. But that's my new love. By the way, my daughter Susan is wearing a necklace that I made for her years back. So, and my daughter Barbara has one too.
I don't have
You don't have any. I didn't. You have some. But anyway, I keep busy.
Thank you for talking about that.
Thank you all, and let's retire to the gallery and to that beautiful exhibit. And I think there's wine and hors d'oeuvres still. So please join us all there. Thank you very much.